Cynical discussion about the CIA. The mission now is called Agent Scrub, dropping nearly 1/3 of the CIA's informants from the payroll. In a plan initiated 2 years ago by then-Director John Deutsch, the agency has severed its ties with more than 1,000 secret informants. The reason? Well, the agency deemed a large number of informants unproductive. Others were involved in serious criminal activity, while some were tied to human rights abuses. But since many informants are a bit unsavory, how does one initiate contact and then manage an informant? Well, Michael Levine is a 25-year veteran of undercover work for 4 federal agencies. He retired from the Drug Enforcement Administration in 1989. He's an expert at covert operations and has taught courses to other agents in the management of informants. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks.
Whew, boy, that would be a tough job, but let's start out with the big question. Why is the CIA making a fuss about this today as if, oh my gosh, we've got bad guys on the payroll, we need to do something about this?
Isn't that incredible? I was an inspector of operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration. If one DEA office announced that they had scrubbed 1/3 of their informers for criminal activity, the first thing the Drug Enforcement Administration would do is send in teams of inspectors to find out who the agents were that handled these guys. How boobish can you be? Or how criminal can you be? In other words, the Drug Enforcement Administration would recognize the fact that if you getting rid of the informers, who we all know are criminals, is not the solution to the problem. 1,000 informers, 1,000 unproductive, on the payroll, 1,000 informers committing murders, 1,000 informers smuggling drugs while America is being taxed $100 billion in 7 years to fight drugs is overwhelming. And to not point the finger at one CIA official, I think is just too much for America to bear.
So you accept that the problem they describe is real, that they ought to get rid of these guys, but we ought to know who has been in charge. The question I have is how do you enter the underworld and get people to talk to you with relevant information who are not involved in criminal activity? Seems a bit naive to think you can do that.
Well, the problem with Central Intelligence is that no one investigates them ever. To give you a perfect example, 1993, one of their informers, a general in the Venezuelan National Guard, was caught smuggling a ton of cocaine into the United States. It was on 60 Minutes. It was on the front page of the New York Times. The head of Central Intelligence, ironically a defense attorney, Mr. Woolsey, then makes the rounds of national media, and in national media he says the drugs never hit the streets. My own sources were telling me, Mike, as much as 20 tons hit the streets. 20 tons of cocaine on the streets of the U.S. in the hands of CIA informers. Well, 6 months ago, that CIA informant, General Guillen from the Venezuelan National Guard, was indicted for 4 tons of cocaine hitting the streets. So they lied to us.
What makes a difference between using someone like that and indicting someone like that? Because obviously while you're using them, you know what they're doing.
Absolutely.
When do you decide to indict?
In this particular case, Central Intelligence was caught so red-handed that, and you're a judge, listen to the facts of this. Central Intelligence goes to the head of the DEA office in Venezuela and says, we have this scheme. Now, this is not informers. This is CIA agents. We have a scheme to smuggle tons of cocaine into the U.S. to build the credibility of their informer. The CIA, the DEA official looks them in the eye and said, that is bizarre. That is a boob idea, the equivalent of dropping an A-bomb on New York to see what damage it'll do. Well, that's not enough for the CIA. They then go to the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, Judge Bonner, and he tells them, in essence, the same thing. They do it anyway. Now, that is a federal crime. Let me give you an example of conspiracy, how bad it is if you're just a walking around American. Right here in New York, I put 2 New York City policemen in jail for 10 and 12 years apiece because they knew their friend was dealing in drugs. They didn't make any money. They didn't help him. They just looked the other way. Now, here you have a case where CIA goes to DEA to help their assets smuggle cocaine and do it in violation of federal law, and no CIA official is touched. That's treason.
But wouldn't the response in the CIA be, obviously, we have to control some of this. We have to have some of these guys on the streets to get credibility as one of the guys, to be able to then maybe bust the top. So you run with a couple of lower level guys if you can get the big boys.
Well, Catherine, the equivalent is, I, Michael Levine, want credibility with the mafia, so I go out and kill 20 or 30 people. The law has some limits. That's so far beyond the limits of the law. They traditionally say, we have to make deals with devils.
Exactly.
The problem is that the devils, for 3 decades, have shown themselves demonstrably smarter than CIA. I mean, people like Manuel Noriega on CIA payroll for decades, while DEA knew he was smuggling drugs.
What was it, General Gutierrez, the drug czar of Mexico that was just indicted the other day?
I was part of an operation called Operation Trifecta. I posed as Miguel Luis Garcia, head of an American mafia, half Sicilian, half Puerto Rican, and I sat as close as you and I are with a man in a Mexican colonel uniform, happened to be a grandson of an ex-president in Mexico. And on video, he sold me the Mexican government, a 15-ton cocaine deal. I rented the Mexican army. This was 1987. I rented the Mexican army to protect my drug
Those are
lord.
pretty broad statements, Michael. Renting the Mexican army, handing you the Mexican government.
Yeah, it was all in the New York Times bestseller, by the way, deep cover. It's fact by fact, tape-recorded fact, videotape. One of these days, I have the videotape of it. We can show it to you. That videotape was sent to the Attorney General of the United States, then Edwin Meese, who then called the Attorney General of Mexico and warned him about our deep cover operation while we were still undercover. I mean, when you certify or decertify Mexico, Mr. Rogers said it beautifully, you better certify or decertify the State Department and the CIA first, because you can't, on one hand, protect the biggest drug dealers in the world, and then on the other hand, point a finger at them, because that's what we're doing.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, more with Michael Levine.